All right, and we are ready for you, Matt, whenever you are.
Sure, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do that Zoom thing and ask if everyone can see the screen and the slide. So if someone could give me a thumbs up, that'd be appreciated.
We can see it.
Awesome. So I'll start by reading the slides. I do want to thank everyone for joining us for our Network and Connect today. Today, we're going to talk about creating access in higher education through universal design for learning. And we've brought two super qualified people to talk about how we can use universal design for learning in higher education. Higher education encompasses a lot of things. So hopefully, both Dr. Jennifer Pusateri and Carl Wennerland can talk about all of the different aspects of higher education and how we can embed universal design for learning, again, to create access for a diverse student population. So as we get started, I'd like to invite Jennifer and then Carl to tell us a little bit about themselves before we dive into our webinar today. So Jennifer, if you want to start and just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at, what your work encompasses, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. Hi, everybody. Jennifer Pusateri. I'm in Kentucky. I'm at the University of Kentucky, and I work in our Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching. In that organization, I am the Senior Universal Design Consultant. So I work with faculty a lot, and the position was created originally, and this was actually prior to me being here. It was created to sort of bridge the gap between like faculty development, right? Like teaching faculty and IT and the Disability Resource Center. So I would be in contact with all of those folks. And so I am still in contact with mostly the Disability Resource Center. I don't do a ton with IT, although I do reach out to them occasionally. And so that's a really nice, the position itself, I think, is a really nice position that really encourages us to think campus-wide about things that we're doing specifically related to accessibility and universal design.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Carl, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep. So, hi, I'm Carl Ryan Winterland. I'm academic faculty at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where I teach. I'm special education faculty, where I teach future special education teachers. This is my first year at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Previously, I was at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I was the director of a post-secondary education program for individuals with intellectual disabilities. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
And before we go on, I'll mention Carl's a good friend of mine. Everyone else, please refer to him as Ryan. I give him a hard time. I call him Carl, but he prefers Ryan. Inside joke between the two of us that I've just shared with everyone. But as we go through today, I want to talk about what our Network and Connect is all about. We're trying to connect people to discuss the role of UDL in creating accessible higher education. Hopefully, you as attendees interacting with both Carl and Jennifer can start thinking about, what are those connections you want to make? Who might I reach out to? Hopefully, you see some names that help you network and connect here. In terms of norms for today's presentation, we have the Q&A and the chat enabled. So if you have something, if Jennifer or Carl kind of mentioned something and you want a follow-up question, we're going to be moderating in the background to see, is that a question that we hold for later during a dedicated Q&A time, or we'll kind of make the decision of, hey, should we kind of interrupt and ask that question now? So if you have a question, please go ahead and drop it in that Q&A. And then, all of us on the back end, I'm happy to be joined by Mackenzie, Kelly, Sue, and Janet, who are going to help me moderate this on the back end. We'll kind of decide when those questions will take place. As always, we are recording this, so you can find the recording. Mackenzie, sorry to double check me here, but we will be posting it to YouTube. We'll send out the link to that. And then just to stay up to date with all things, UDL implementation, make sure that you're signed up for that CAST mailing list, because that's where you can find, again, when we post the recording and any other additional information that we'll have. So I'm pretty sure that's the correct info I wanted to give everyone. Best thing you can do is be on that CAST mailing list to get this recording and other professional learning opportunities. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. And Jennifer, I'd like to start with you and just, ask you to kind of talk to this first question. So you've already both established a little bit of background about yourselves. But what can you tell us about your experience working to establish accessible higher education learning environments? What does that consider? And I'm starting with you because you talked about it not being a solo endeavor, right? Like your role was kind of created to include a lot of different people. So can you speak a little bit more to that? And so what does it mean to create an accessible higher education learning environment, and what does that entail?
Yeah, so the person that was in this position before me had a really strong assistive technology background, and she was really good with helping teach people how to design accessible documents and slide decks and Excel files and things like that, which is great. And so she did a lot of trainings across the university to get that ball rolling. And so when I showed up, I mean, I know how to do those things. I am definitely not an expert in making documents accessible. I can get by. But I am more on the pedagogical end is kind of my background and thinking in that way. And so I had a little bit of trouble at first because when I would say UDL, people at our university would think I was talking about alt text and captions, and like that was it, right? That's all we talk about when we're talking about UDL. And so some of the work that I've done in the past, I think five or so years that I've been here has been sort of separating out when we're talking about accessibility, what are we talking about? When we're talking about UDL, what are we talking about? Are they the same thing? So I've done kind of a little bit of deconstruction and then reintegration of some of those ideas, because after all, it is a huge part of the framework of UDL. But if all you concentrate on is alt text and captions, you're missing so much and so much of our the things that make UDL important to me as a neurodivergent learner. And so speaking of neurodivergent learners, recently, since COVID, we've had a lot of faculty-driven questions that have started obviously in a classroom and have somehow filtered their way up to upper level administration about like, hey, these students are not okay. Like what is going on and how can we support them? And this is coming from across the university. So I've done a lot of work in the last year or so about teaching neurodivergent students, but even teaching. So like, here's the thing I have made, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's called What Are Executive Functions? And it's like a whole like 2-3 page document that talks about this is what executive functioning is. This is probably why it's a little rough right now for a lot of people, including students who normally wouldn't have problems with executive functioning. Well, they are now, right? And so a lot of the work I've done has been around that kind of pedagogy that's sort of related to neurodivergence, but also is obviously in the way that UDL is, it's applicable to everyone, right? So that's kind of been my most recent work that I've done. I'm looking forward to this summer. We're going to be having a 3-day UDL boot camp, and I'm super excited about it. That will be our first immersive UDL experience, and so I'm looking forward to working with faculty on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then I kind of want to shift to Carl. We thought of both of you intentionally, right? So Jennifer working at that large scale kind of systems-based implementation of universal design for learning. And then Carl, I thought of our work together working with inclusive post-secondary ed programs. Again, really those students in the margins, probably the smallest student population that you'll find on a campus, but thinking about, the whole purpose of UDL is, finding out what is crucial for some is beneficial for all. So can you talk a little bit about your work, particularly in those inclusive post-secondary environments, maybe given a little bit of description of what those programs are for people that aren't familiar, and then talking about the role of UDL in creating that access.
Yeah, sure. So post-secondary education programs for individuals with intellectual disabilities aren't relatively new. They've been around for quite a while now, but it really started with the Higher Education Opportunity Act when it was reauthorized in 2008, really providing guidance and language in there for individuals with intellectual disabilities to attend college. And so from that point, you started to see a number of programs on university campuses, university and college campuses across the country. There's actually over 300 across the country today at different universities, and programs look a little bit different. About 9 years ago, I helped working with Matt and a couple of other people start a program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I was serving there as the director. We started with one student and eventually grew to 25 students, all with an intellectual disability. We had individuals with Down syndrome and autism, typical individuals that maybe graduated high school with an adjusted diploma, not a standard diploma. They came to our program working towards the program certificate and thinking about how we were going to provide access for this population who took classes with typical peers, who took regular college classes, and really didn't have any separate classes. How can we help make this more accessible? And so we really decided that UDL was the way that we were going to do this. And we we really started by providing trainings across campus with instructors that our students had, but we eventually opened it up to anybody who would like to come. We provided some communication. We made some really nice flyers that we would send out to instructors. But really, it was that training that we started really to help provide access for this population that was now going to be on college that really hadn't received access in the past.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know in the chat, in the Q&A, we're asking for links to some of those resources. So if you were asking, Jennifer was kind enough to drop the link to those things in the chat. So make sure you check those out if those are things that you're interested in. Again, thank you both for just, your detailed responses to that first question. Again, we've talked about some of these things, right? So we've talked about the role UDL has played in guiding your work with others on campus. And Jennifer, you kind of talked about how you message UDL, because I think it's a term that most people have heard of, and I'm sure everyone here is super familiar with it, but it's kind of, what do other people think of, or what do other people see when they hear the term UDL? And to your point earlier, some people are like, oh yeah, I've got alt captions and I've got, image descriptions and stuff like that. But I'll go back to you, Jennifer, and have you start kind of to these 2 points, repeat what you feel is appropriate, but how does UDL guide your work with others on campus? And then how do you message UDL to your campus partners? How do you get them to see that broader vision of what it actually is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like I mentioned, I've done a little bit of undoing and then adjusting the way that people are thinking about UDL. I was thinking of something that just left my head completely. The messaging part is really important as far as, I don't often have workshops that are just about UDL. In fact, I usually don't have the word UDL in there at all. It will be about something else that I know faculty want to know about. So for example, we did a workshop, and this is actually pre-COVID, but we did a workshop called Why Won't They Do the Readings? And so because that's a question we get all the time. Well, I'm giving them readings, they're not doing them. Why aren't they doing the readings? So I put together a workshop. Now, the entire workshop was basically UDL things, right? I was kind of sneaking it in the back door. But in order to get the people I wanted to speak to the most, I needed to put something in place that was going to draw them in. And then I could share a little bit about, okay, well, here's some of the reasons that perhaps students aren't doing the readings. Have we thought about, is this something that's relevant to students? Have we thought about, is this something that's overwhelming to students, right? Can we maybe make it smaller pieces? So I'm just using the framework of UDL to think about how can I answer the questions that I know faculty have. So that's one way that I've done that. Now because I am including things about UDL, I often have a "you've been UDL'd" slide at the end of my presentations that will include things like it has, I'll find a link to it in a minute and put it in the chat box, but basically I'm just telling them, like, what did I build into this workshop that was UDL already? Like, I was thinking about this in the planning stage and thinking about the fact that I was going to have a variety of different learners from a variety of different fields, looking for a variety of different things. And so these are the things that I built in on purpose so that this workshop would meet the needs of whomever showed up. And so by having that at the end of my workshops, a lot of times people will ask questions about, well, what does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about, UDL? Or I often meet with, so we have a mid-semester feedback session, or I don't even, the word just left. This happens a lot, you all. The words just leave my head, and it's not getting better with age, I'll tell you that much. We have a service that we provide, a mid-semester feedback service, which a lot of teaching centers do. And part of that, after we've collected the feedback from the students, then we sit down with the instructors and have a conversation about, here are the things that your students have said is working really well. Here are the things that they might, suggestions they might have for what you could improve upon or do a little bit better so that next year for students who come into the class. And also it's the middle of the semester, so you can still make changes. So in those meetings, if I come across a faculty member who is doing a lot of the things that we would suggest, with a UDL lens, I will ask them, like, hey, are you aware of UDL? Because it seems like you're already thinking about how you can meet the needs of these learners in your class who are coming from all these different backgrounds and whatever. Like, you're already thinking about that. And that's actually a thing. And it's called Universal Design for Learning. And of course, you can see I have the poster on my wall back here. So I can share that with them. But that's another way that I've been able to kind of get to individual people and say, hey, the things you're doing actually are really interesting and are related to this. And I've got a couple different research projects that have evolved out of those conversations where, because we're a Research One university, so our entire, like, everybody has to do research. So if faculty can do research on something that can be supported by, like, me or somebody else in our office, on their teaching, like a SOTL projects, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning project, then that kind of reduces the weight on them. And it also allows us to start working on getting research out there. So those are some of the different ways that I'm trying to, like, infiltrate UDL into all of the things that are happening in our campus.
No, I love that. And I'm gonna, I don't want to call it steal some of those ideas, but definitely take them. Because I'm sure you and anyone else that's done a UDL training for others, I think if you start off explicitly by saying it, you get a lot of the, oh, but I'm doing that already, or, oh, that's just good teaching. And that's not a debate or conversation that we need to get into, but I'm sure it's something that all of us have heard, right? And I kind of like how, in the way that you framed it, you kind of go through it and then you show, like, why you made those intentional design considerations in the development of your materials. And I think that's super powerful and kind of just showing that this isn't a checklist. It is a design framework meant to be used intentionally. So I think that's super awesome. And so, Carl, same question for you, but I think I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. When you think about messaging UDL for like the utilization and implementation of it for a small student population, how do you message it to where, instructors, faculty, and people on campus don't see it as a thing for the 25 students on a comprehensive campus of thousands of students? How do you get them to see it, or how do you message it to say, like, this is essential for our population, but beneficial for all? How do you kind of navigate that, I guess, in your messaging?
Yeah, so Yeah, I really like what Jen had said, because we message it very similar, where we don't come out and say this is a UDL training. At the beginning of every semester, we would send out communication to all the instructors, and basically saying, hey, you're going to have an individual with an intellectual disability in your class. Things might look a little bit different for that student, but we're here to help you and provide some resources and some training so that you're successful in that class. We're kind of like tricking them almost, in a way. And uh, they they would come to our training, and when they would, we would say, hey, bring with you your syllabus for your course. We're going to work through a number of different things in this training that are not only going to benefit the student with an intellectual disability, but is going to benefit everybody in the entire class. And that's when we would go through each of the principles of UDL, within, kind of built within that training, giving them an opportunity to then think about ways that they can make it more accessible to every learner. Our partnerships started with the DRC in our messaging, ensuring that everybody across campus knew that this population was now on campus. And it really started above that, actually, from our president and provost office, saying that, this population is on campus. We're here to provide support for them and give them an opportunity just like anybody else on campus. And so those are some of our partners, but we really framed it as an opportunity to make their course, to help them with their course, to provide resources and provide additional help. But here are the principles that are going to help everybody.
Awesome. Thank you both. So moving on, Carl, I'll have you start, because I know you've done a lot of work in areas of campus life that we don't necessarily think of every day, like the residential aspect is something that's kind of popping into my mind. So I'd like you to start by talking about some benefits, once you've messaged and have really begun implementation. Just anecdotally, what are some benefits that you've noticed from UDL across campus life, like all things that happen on campus?
So immediately I can say, right from our training, all of the instructors, 99% of the feedback that we got was positive. We collected a lot of data on what they knew going in, what they knew at the end of the training, and overwhelmingly, the training and support was very, very positive. From that, I saw anecdotally that they were sharing these things with members in their departments. So they're sharing these resources. They're saying, hey, this group is on campus. You should go to the training, or you should have one of these members in your class. And so it was very, very positive across campus with the instructors. Like I said, about 99%. It was very, very positive, and it was great. We also saw, with the uniqueness of the program, we had opportunities to work in a lot of different areas across campus. So Matt mentioned residential life. We had students that were living in dorms and student housing. And so we were working with the resident advisors. We were working with their staff and student employees, and providing similar trainings to them, ensuring that everybody was comfortable and everybody understood what the goal of our program was. I'm trying to think of some other opportunities across campus. Some others really dealt with the employment and internship opportunities that our students had. We were providing trainings to all of our employers who were employing our students. Our students were working towards our certificate, and part of their certificate was they had to work in internships. And so they're working with typical peers. We were often working with the staff. For instance, at the rec center, we would provide trainings for the rec center staff in working with our students. So there's a lot of different opportunities across campus that I had to infuse these principles of UDL.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I know in our work together, we always talked about, we want to do community-based instruction with these young adult individuals with disabilities. And we said, what better place to do that than a university? Because, a university is a microcosm of everything going on in the community. There's where you live, where you work, where you socialize, where you learn, all happening, in a contained few blocks, of a city. So just thinking of all the barriers that may or may not exist and creating access to residential life, vocational training, vocational opportunities, I think are all awesome examples that maybe we don't consider every day. Because I think oftentimes we see post-secondary education as like strictly an academic space, but there's so much more going on all over campus.
Yeah, and we sorry, just to piggyback a little bit, we had opportunities to work with the student union staff, the library staff, other locations across campus, saying, "Hey, we're here. This is what type of a program we are, and our students are going to be here." So we had opportunities to continue that in those areas as well.
Yeah, and just to kind of like wrap up, the reason I started with you, again, just being familiar with the work, is just highlighting that university life goes, so far beyond the classroom. And again, there's barriers that exist in those other areas. So using universal design for learning to try and tackle those. Jennifer, I'd like you to apply kind of your lens and experience to the same question too, though. What are some benefits that you've noticed in and out of courses as it relates to UDL and campus life?
One of the things that's been interesting and this has been also in the last few years, we've had a couple different students who have physical disabilities, and which is not unusual, right? We have many students like that. But within the last few years, we've had a couple students, and I've been contacted by several of their professors individually. Like, I don't think this was a group effort. They just reached out to me individually. And eventually, and this was not anything I did, the departments that were where those students were made, like their major was in. So one of them was like a landscape architecture student, for example. The landscape architecture department decided to have me and somebody from the Disability Resource Center come out and take a look at their physical space of their studio and try and figure out, because they were getting ready to go through a renovation, and they wanted to start proactively thinking about, well, if this student is going to be in our department, we want to make sure that we're, setting ourselves up and setting the student up for success with our physical space, which makes sense. They're architecture people, right? So they're thinking about things like that, although they had not been proactively thinking about it before, but now they are. Fine, let's start there. And so, like, they, as a department, came together. We all looked at the space together and talked about it. And then we all looked at kind of the plans for what are we going to be doing moving forward? Like, what's the physical space going to be like, but also what are some of the things that you're doing, activities that you're doing, and how can we support the student and give them what they need to be able to do these activities? Like, this was a department-wide conversation, and that is not usual. And then I've had that same thing happen with a totally different student. And because they were reaching out as a department, and different instructors were talking about the same problems, we were able to find some solutions that we wouldn't maybe have not thought of before. So, for example, this one student who has visual impairment, she was having difficulty using our university's library website to search for peer-reviewed articles, and this was a major part of the course. And so I reached out to some folks that I knew after being contacted by their department. I reached out to some folks I knew in the library department, and I said, hey, we have a student who's using a screen reader and it's not working very well. And they're trying to complete this assignment. What can we do? And so they got someone on their team, they pulled them in, and we created this. I didn't create it. They created a widget that would take that student directly to one page, and all it would do was to just search peer-reviewed articles. So normally there's like a lot of other things they can check, or on, books or articles or whatever. And it's kind of overwhelming, honestly. It's kind of overwhelming to me as a person with a PhD who's fully cited. Like, it's overwhelming to me to use the website, the library website. So they put this widget together. It worked great. The student could do exactly what they needed. Well, then now the people who helped put that idea together, the people in the department, but also the folks at the library, and we are all collectively working on a research project to take that same widget that worked really well for this student. It was created for a student with a visual impairment. And now we're going to embed that in a freshman course and do some actual, like, a study to say, this thing that we created for this one student will probably be really helpful for a lot of other students. Let's try it, and let's try it in a research situation and see what happens. So it seems like it used to be a lot of UDL lone wolves across the campus, but it seems like it's kind of momentum is picking up a little bit. And it's now departments are asking me to come rather than one instructor, right? And so to me, that's very encouraging, and I'm excited to see that work continue.
Yeah, awesome. You love that snowball effect, right? Just once it gets rolling downhill, it gets a little bit bigger. And two, like, the thing I want to add to what both of you said is, I think the cool thing about implementing UDL on campuses, especially in those I don't like the internships that students have to do. So for me, it was student teaching, and then for others, they have to do like clinical rotations. Finding solutions to make those places accessible and inclusive is awesome. I loved it, even though like they might be involved in departments that I have nothing to do with. I love to go out and see them. I got to go to a hospital in the Bay Area. And if you've ever been into a hospital, there's a lot of PA announcements saying like where doctors, nurses, and other people need to go. But if you are someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, that can be very difficult. So I got to see a lot of cool, like, blinking lights, and I got to see a pager for the first time in 30 years, it feels like. So a lot of cool stuff. And so I think if you enjoy problem solving, UDL implementation is something that you'll definitely love on your campus. I think I'm going to go back to Jennifer, because your last response kind of like leads me to think that you can kind of speak to this right away. But with Universal Design for Learning implementation, has your work or your role changed at all? And kind of like you said, the snowball effect, are people more responsive to the role of Universal Design for Learning in higher education? And why do you think that is? I guess I'll add the "and why" to that second bullet point.
Yeah, so for the first question, has my work changed at all? I mean, the answer is yes, because like COVID was in there, right? So like that's a whole different situation. But I've also had it's been a very strange last couple of years, but in the last year, I have had multiple neurodivergent, like, grad students or postdocs or whatever reach out to me because they have a recent diagnosis of some part of the neurodivergent umbrella, and they have somehow received my name. And like, when these folks have come in to talk to me, they're at a loss. Like, they don't understand what's going on, or how they don't know, like, I guess really kind of how to handle being a neurodivergent academic. And it's not fun sometimes. And I don't know, like, they tell me who gave them their names, like gave them my name, and it's someone I don't know. So I'm like, I don't know how this has happened. But it's been really interesting because, they, of course, through their lens as a neurodivergent person, whether they've been diagnosed or not, they're seeing academia in a totally different way than possibly their colleagues. And it's been some interesting conversations, but it's actually prompted me to think about starting a book about teaching neurodivergent students in college, because it seems like, of course, there's not. You might hear someone say that there are more neurodivergent people than before, and that is not true. I think through the use of social media, specifically like TikTok and Instagram Reels, like people are learning more about themselves and identifying themselves as having some kind of a disability. And I think that's really interesting. So my work has kind of I'm still doing the same work, but it seems like some new pockets have opened up in different places that I had not expected. And then the second part, are people more responsive to the role of UDL in higher ed? Yes, definitely. COVID changed everything, honestly. It changed everything because, actually, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, faculty were, especially older faculty or faculty perhaps that were not as used to teaching online, they were put back into the point of view of a student because they had to learn things like from scratch. So people who normally present in person now had to learn how to do that in a totally different way. Well, that's putting them back into the seat of a learner, right? Like they have to be a learner in that situation. So I think I think some people gained empathy through that process and are now thinking about more inclusive pedagogies and how they can incorporate those things into their classroom because they know what it feels like. The other thing that's been really interesting, excuse me, is that post-COVID, and I think I mentioned this already, but faculty are a little exasperated as to what to do now because it's a little different, right? And so I've been doing a lot of work in that area and a lot of, I don't want to say hand-holding because it's really not even hand-holding, it's just supporting our faculty in kind of relearning what it looks like to teach in 2024. So I think because all of that happened, people are now more aware and have been awakened to some of the things that perhaps they were not before COVID. I think that's been, for me at least, that's been really powerful.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Carl, I'll go to you. Obviously, I know your professional role has changed, but focusing on your work, just the trajectory of starting with one student, growing to 25 and all of that. Can you talk about how the work changed as the program got bigger and as you started engaging in more things like vocational placements, internships, residential life? And then, did that lead to more people being familiar and hungry for UDL, I guess, in their partnership with you?
Yeah, so obviously going from one student to 5 to 10 to 15 to 25, we obviously had a lot more students and a lot more work to do. And so this made things more challenging for us as we were trying to reach everybody that we could, that we needed to reach to provide that support. I think that we were able to do that, but kind of going to the question, how things have kind of changed. I'll say that with COVID, it changed things obviously in a big way, similar to what Jen was saying, but. We looked at how we were providing those trainings and looked at some other ways that we could reach individuals in that process. And ultimately, I will say that in my anecdotal experience, people across campus were more responsive to UDL, to us, because they were good teachers and they wanted to do everything they could to ensure that everybody was receiving access to their content. And so that was a good thing. Overwhelmingly, I saw that in that role.
Awesome. Thank you. And to like what both of you are saying, it's always fun when someone else reaches out to you and says like, hey, can you help? And I want to share one of the coolest opportunities I had kind of to this, because Jennifer's story kind of reminded me. Someone had referred a faculty member to me about implementing UDL, and that faculty member happened to teach rocket science. So I thought, like, hey, this is really cool. This is like the one and only time I can say, well, it's not rocket science, because it actually was rocket science. So fun stuff and fun people you get to meet on university campuses. Getting into some of the fun questions, I always like to share successes. So I'll start with you. Based on your work, what are some successes that you want to share? And then what are areas of growth you hope to see continue in terms of, UDL implementation and just access being created at the higher ed level?
Yeah, so I think success in a couple of different areas. We saw success in the instructors and the professors that we had an opportunity to work with. They were overwhelmingly open and wanting students with and without disabilities in their course, and that was really encouraging to see. In addition, they're going to other members of their department. Hey, you should look at this training. You should go to this next semester. And then individual students, because faculty were so open to maybe some new ideas that they hadn't thought of or implemented within their class to that point. They were implementing these things, and we were seeing great student success with those students and those instructors. Each semester, it seemed like it got better and better for our students. And I have an opportunity here now in my current role at UNCW. They've just received some funding, and they're actually starting a post-secondary education program similar to the one that I ran at UNLV. And so I have a new opportunity here to share across campus. This is what this is, and these are ways that you can improve your courses and have greater success, make it more accessible for other people. So I really look forward to that over the next year.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think, like you said, we've definitely seen growth in those programs. I remember if we went back 15 years, there was probably a handful, a dozen. 10 years ago, when I got started in inclusive post-secondary programs, there were about 200. And 10 years later, we're at over 300. And I started one up, you're starting one up. It's awesome to see just that growth in that opportunity at different locations. So thank you. And Jennifer, same question. Successes that you want to share, and then areas of growth you hope to see continue.
We actually have a similar program at our university. I don't get the chance to run it. It's run by another organization called the Human Development Institute. But I'm part of that as well. I'm part of that project. And so last year, we had 2 students that were part of that program, and they all have to do kind of like an internship at the end of this one course. And the course is about universal design. And so these 2 students came to me and asked if they could do something, if they could like intern here in our office. And I was like, ooh, what can I do? So I was thinking so we have a podcast that we started. It's a limited number of episodes, but we started it during COVID and kind of have continued it. And so that podcast goes through all of the 9 guidelines, like one at a time. And it's just me talking to a colleague who doesn't know anything about UDL. And so he's like asking the questions and I'm answering the questions or whatever. So that's the first 10 episodes. So these students, they needed to do something that was about universal design. And they liked the idea of doing something about universal design for learning. And so I was like, well, we have this podcast and we've gone through each of the guidelines. Like, is there another way that you all could kind of share maybe your experiences from a student perspective of how maybe we could do row by row, or we could do by, column or whatever, but like they decided to try row by row. So they made 3 podcast episodes. One is about the access row, one is about the build row, one is about the internalize row. And then we added them as bonus episodes to the podcast. So I put it in the chat. They're really good. And did I mute? No, I unmuted. Okay. The episodes that the students recorded are amazing, and their examples are so great. And like you can hear in their voice, this sounds so cheesy, the power of UDL. Like you can hear in their voice the difference when they have an instructor that is supporting them through UDL and an instructor that is not. Like you can hear it. And it's really powerful. So that's one of the successes that I think has been really exciting for us. I'm hoping to see more growth. I would like to have more sustained work with UDL with faculty. Right now, it's just been kind of a workshop or a like, hey, you happen to stumble upon these things in their UDL, but like not anything that's been over time. And so the first step being this UDL camp that's coming up, and this one is for faculty. And then we are possibly going to have another one in July, and that one will be geared towards staff. And so anyone that is a staff member could attend that one. So I'm excited about those because those are going to be a little bit more intensive, like this is what UDL is, and this is like how you do it, and more than just a 1 hour workshop. I would love to, in the coming years, have a UDL faculty learning community that goes throughout a semester, and then perhaps at the end we could use that to write some kind of a paper or research project of some kind. So it's really that sustained work that I would love to see and be able to track that over time and get feedback from students, get feedback from the instructors, so that we can just learn more about implementing UDL in higher ed.
Awesome, thank you. And then the last thing I'd like you both to share, and then we'll get to questions. So I think if you have questions, now would be a good time to drop those in the Q&A because we'll get to them after this. But Jennifer, I'll start with you. Any parting wisdom you have for anyone in that post-secondary community, so instructors, faculty, departments, colleges, post-secondary institutions on the whole, what advice do you have, not necessarily for UDL implementation, but what do you have for getting started? Like, what is the first step you would encourage folks to take?
Yeah, first step, man.
Or maybe not first step, but like if they wanted to get started, what's some advice that you'd give?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is try giving some kind of a choice situation. Like just try it. Just try it and see how it goes. Because I think that's the issue, is that faculty don't want to try. Like they just don't want to even dip their toe in. And I think sometimes that's why things like faculty learning communities and UDL boot camps can be so helpful, because it kind of gives them that permission slip to try something new. So I guess that would be my parting wisdom.
And then Carl, same question. I know you're hoping to help, UNCW get started with a new inclusive post-secondary ed program. As you're beginning that journey, I guess, what is your parting wisdom for helping UDL implementation get started on a site?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a similar message that we kind of started with, that we're not necessarily, we're kind of hiding, not necessarily hiding, but maybe showing a way that can be more making courses and students in them have it be more accessible to them. I have that opportunity probably over the next year or two to really see that on a new campus. I would encourage all instructors, departments, colleges to focus on these things within within their own departments. Start talking about this. It's interesting, as we went through our training and instruction, I would show them the Higher Education Opportunity Act. I'd show them the law where it talks about UDL being in higher education, and I'd ask people if they knew that was even in the law, and most majority said no. And so it's just sharing these strategies, these principles that can make their courses more accessible. So I would share that.
Awesome. Thank you. I do have two questions that were dropped into our Q&A. A couple now. I'll start with Jennifer because I think this one probably works for you, and I kind of vibe with this question as someone who works in teacher preparation and kind of uses UDL as work with teachers. But the question statement asks, I'm doing some work with colleagues around UDL being used by faculty in the business school, not for students with disabilities so much as just business faculties teaching in general. And they're curious if anyone else is seeking to take UDL into non-education coursework. So as teacher prep faculty, I know I'm super guilty of kind of containing it to my teacher prep coursework. But Jennifer, can you talk about UDL being taken into those non-education, so non-teacher prep environments?
Yeah, we definitely have folks doing that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of an example, but the short answer is yes, they are. I've found that right now it seems like grad students are really interested, like TAs, like grad students who are also teaching, are really interested in learning new things about how they could be a better teacher. And I taught a course this last fall, and it was through the graduate school. And so the course was called 21st Century Learners or something like that. But you could kind of make it about what you wanted to make it about. So obviously I made it about UDL. And so I had students from all over the campus. Like one was like an engineering student, one was like in forestry, one was in chemistry, one was in, I think, English, like writing in English. I can't remember the other one, but like, yeah, for sure. And I thought it was really interesting how they were able to figure out how UDL would fit into their field and into the things that they're teaching, because it really fits nicely. It's wherever there are brains, UDL will work. Like if there are brains and they are learning, UDL will work in that situation. So I guess that would be my answer to that question.
Perfect. And then Carl, I'll go to you. I know we've done work with faculty across the spectrum, but again, targeting that population of students with disabilities participating. But is there anything that sticks out to you with other departments that you worked with to make kind of non-education coursework accessible to your student population?
I don't know if there's anything off the top of my head. I know that we frame it as an opportunity that's not related to individuals with disabilities. Yes, this will help individuals with disabilities, but so really we say bring your syllabus with you, and we work through that syllabus and show ways that they can increase that.
Cool, thank you. I mean, I remember when we started that first semester, I worked with some political science faculty and their TAs to make their classroom a little more accessible. I mean, it's always intense when, there's a section of 100 students. So even though it was kind of targeting our student population, I'm sure there were scores of students in that, section of 100 that benefited from some of those things.
Yeah.
Second question. I know I can speak to it if both of you aren't sure, but the question is, have you been working alongside the folks who are redesigning the UDL guidelines with version 3.0 coming out soon, to ensure that the higher ed perspective is considered? Like I said, I can speak to this if either of you want, but I want to give you the opportunity, starting with Jennifer, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, so I was so grateful to be asked to be part of the I can't remember what we're calling it now. We have a new name, but it's basically the implementers, the people who are out implementing UDL across the globe. And so I've been part of that group that's been informing the work for the 3.0 update. And I'll tell you what, so when I first heard that they were going to be doing this revamp, and this has been a few years ago, I sat down with the framework in my hand, like a paper copy of the framework in my hand, and I got on the guidelines website and I went through I get in the weeds like this, y'all. I went through checkpoint by checkpoint, and I wanted to know two things. What are the most, I'm sorry, when you look on the website, you go to the checkpoint and you can like click on the checkpoint and then it takes you to this other page. And it has a place where you can look at the research that was compiled to support that particular checkpoint. And it's pretty amazing and magical. So I'm looking at that. So I went in and I looked through this huge list. And if you go look at it, you'll see there are many, many, many studies. I went through this whole list and I was like, okay, I want to know what's the most recent study for this checkpoint. And I want to know, are there any that have to do with higher ed? And so like I started writing them down and I'd be like 2007, that's the latest one. That's like way too long ago. And then I was making all these notes to myself. It probably looked like I probably looked like a serial killer, honestly, when I was trying to figure all these things out. And so I sent it to some of the folks that were going to be working on this project. And I was like, hey guys, can we like get some more updated, like newer studies that we can add to this list? Because I work at a university and faculty want to know these things. And I can't be putting 2007 studies on there to try and justify why we're doing this thing. And also, can we get some that are more geared toward higher ed as part of like the list of the research that goes on there, on the actual like guidelines website? So those are two of the things I've kind of been fighting for. I don't know if I got through or not. We'll find out, I suppose. But yes, that's definitely something that I've been doing. There are a couple other people, Eric Moore, who was formerly at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and is now at, I think, Kennedy Krieger. He's also part of that, and there are several other people from higher ed. So yes, for sure, we have been all up in that.
Perfect. I think that confidently answers that. Yes, in fact, the higher ed perspective was considered in 3.0. So the last question that we have, and the last question that I'll pose to you both, and I'll start this one with Carl. And I always love finding out where folks are from. So this is a question, I believe, from someone in Australia. So know that your presentation is now reaching globally. So Carl, what advice do you have for gathering success data on UDL implementation in courses or projects, that support implementation? So how do you suggest collecting data related to success?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did with our presentation is we always gathered data before and after our training. And then we would gather some data about the midpoint of the semester and at the very end of the semester, where we would kind of follow the pre and post that we offered at the beginning of the training and follow up in the middle of the semester and at the end of the semester. We'd have specific questions in there related to UDL and how things are going related to the one or two students that we might have had in the course. But it was always kind of focused around those students and if they were having some success or some troubles and the things that they implemented. So kind of keeping track of those things.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Jennifer, to round out, I'll ask the same question. Sort of what data do you collect to evaluate the work that you're doing?
Well, I think the answer to this question is the same answer to every question in education. The answer is it depends. It depends on what it is that you're wanting to know. So one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm not sure exactly how to make this happen. I've been thinking about how can I show faculty that using UDL is actually going to save them time, like in the long run. And so one of the things I was going to start with was something as simple as, I think it was a syllabus I was thinking about, but I was thinking about how I could have faculty. No, I'm sorry. I was thinking about transparent assignment design, right? So like being very clear and explicit about exactly what you want from students. That's what it was. Because what I think faculty don't get at first is that like, if you're building all this stuff in ahead of time, then you're not going to get like 3,000 emails 2 days before everything's due, right? Like, because you've already answered those questions ahead of time. Anyway, so I would love to be able to have faculty make some changes using the framework of UDL, of course, and track how many emails they're getting, like before students before students turn the thing in. And so I'd love to know, like, before you made these changes, how many emails and questions were you getting? And now, how are you getting? I don't know what the answer is, but I hope it would be less. But I that's one of the things I would really like to know more about.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I want to thank you both. I mean, you filled an hour with engaging conversation, engaging tips, tricks. I want to point out that Sue did put a link to the 3.0 guidelines, the draft, and the graphic organizer in the chat. So please check those out if you're not familiar with that work. You can also go to the CAST website under our work, that tab. You can also find who the panelists were, the folks that were working on that 3.0 revision, and kind of what that work is aimed at doing. But again, I want to round out with thanking both Jennifer and Carl for, again, just a wonderful session on UDL and higher education. I think there's so much more that we could talk about. I mean, this could be like a 4-hour conversation if we wanted it to be, but the whole purpose of the Network and Connect is to kind of give you all some ideas and hopefully look at names in the chat, Jennifer and Carl themselves, and just find ways to make connections and build those professional networks so that we can continue and further implementation of UDL in different spaces for learning. So again, thank you both, and thank you for everyone in our audience and our participant pool who joined us today. And keep a lookout in that CAST newsletter for our next opportunity for a Network and Connect. Again, thanks.